Hello, I'm Zach Divelbiss, the attorney and owner at Future First Criminal Law. I am here today to give you a video that helps explain and give about 10 tips on how to successfully complete probation. Probation is something that many people here in Maricopa County get, but there's a lot of problems because probation is such a wide, grasping development in our system. It basically started from nothing and it's grown into many different things, and probation is very complex. And this video is meant to try and give a handful of tips to help you succeed. Of course, it's not all encompassing. There are many different things that you can do to help yourself, to help your specific case. I don't go into many specifics about things such as interstate compact, so you have to refer to some of my other videos for that. But first off, let me start off by letting you know that with probation there are many benefits. There's also some tricks that you will likely fall victim to if you're not smart about it. So created this informational sheet here that will hopefully get many of you through probation successfully. That way you don't end up back in jail, prison, or worse with new charges. And here's where we're going to start. Is essentially probation gives you that sigh of relief that I discussed here, that says, great, the case is done, I'm on probation, so I get to go back to doing what I was doing beforehand. And for many of you, that's not going to be a problem. For others, that very well could be. What you were doing before wasn't maybe constructive, and it's what got you in trouble in the first place. Anyways, what it's saying here is if you have minor offenses, if you don't have priors, unsupervised probation is obviously the best thing you can get. This is typically going to be for your misdemeanor offenses, and then to be quite candid, most of our courts these days don't even do unsupervised probation. They've basically found out that it's a waste of time. They didn't have a way to keep track of it. Even if you violated your probation with, say, a new case, a new charge, they don't really know unless it happened to be in the same court. For instance, if you got in trouble in Tempe, Scottsdale would have no idea. So the probation didn't really serve a purpose. Of course, there are many other reasons behind why it's sometimes not followed. It's, of course, within judges' discretion, so there's a lot more to that I don't necessarily go into. Then you have what's called your standard supervised probation. Standard supervised probation is typically what you're going to get with felony cases. You're going to get a probation officer. You're going to be required to essentially follow all the terms of your probation, which is a litany of them. And once again, I don't go into all of them on this video. But there is a third and the highest form of probation. It's called intensive supervised probation. In short, you can abbreviate for IPS. I know many people try and use that IPS acronym to say it stands for in prison soon. And very well that could be true for you, someone you know, and hopefully that isn't the case. Intensive probation isn't meant to be something that basically forces you back into prison, but it very well can be. It's very strict. It's very difficult. It's very important if you have an attorney that your attorney knows you, knows what you're capable of, and they don't set you up for failure. Very easily you could be set up for failure if you take an intensive supervised probation plea deal and then you immediately fail. That would not be ideal for your case. I know there's some more things that you can go into on probation, such as what happens here in our felony cases is technically you can't agree to a level of probation, whether it is unsupervised, supervised, or intensive. Technically that is up to the judge. Of course, your defense attorney can make a deal with the prosecutor or the district attorney, however you want to phrase them, in order to try and get an understanding of what they're going to be shooting for at sentencing as far as intensive versus standard. There is also a pre-sentence report that has to be done for every felony case after you take a plea deal, but before sentencing. That pre-sentence interview is essentially a probation officer who interviews you, gets more of your background, looks at the case, and basically gives a recommendation to the judge that says you should or shouldn't receive intensive supervised probation, or you should get just standard, or in just a beyond rare case, you would get unsupervised. Anyways, continuing on, At the bottom of this page here, I have that failure to pay fines and restitutions, positive drug tests, and additional arrests are, of course, the downfall of many people on probation. And then I'm going to get into some of our helpful tips and hints. Here's some of my contact information if you want to get a hold of myself, my team directly. If you are having any trouble with your probation officer, there are many cases and many situations that I've been able to successfully help my clients. Sometimes it just takes a little legal nudge here and there from a lawyer against the probation officer to get things going smoothly. We wish it didn't have to be that way, but sometimes it is. Number one, this is the biggest tip, as I kind of mentioned it before, is you have to have a smart defense attorney. Now I know smart defense attorney is a very broad thing. I'm not being necessarily more specific in that because there are very, very good attorneys out there, and it's tough to know well in advance until you get to this stage. Many attorneys are really good at getting people probation, and that would be typically a good outcome. However, there are going to be some pitfalls there that you could have. For instance, here's the scenario that you want to play out. So the state finds it easier to convict a person on a probation violation than the normal charge. What this means is you get arrested by the police and they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt in order to find you guilty, potentially have a trial. But if you accept a probation offer and you get put on probation, you basically don't have such a high standard. It's no longer beyond a reasonable doubt. You give up many of your rights, such as with the supervised probation offer. Your probation officer essentially has the right to come and check on you whenever, wherever, whyever. They don't have to get warrants, and that can be a problem. So here we go. The district attorney may agree to reduce your sentence that includes probation rather than going to trial. Typically a good outcome. However, for example, the defendant, we're going to call him Lou in this situation, is charged with felony possession of cocaine. Many of the drug cases that we handle, this is a huge factor of something to consider. Anyways, Lou has a prior history, and he can receive the active time for prison. However, the cocaine was not in his immediate possession, but was within his reach. This is something in another video that I go through discussing how this actually plays out in a legal courtroom or in the legal world or in negotiations with the prosecutor. Anyways, he might be convicted after going to trial, or he might get off if the jury decides the drugs were not in his possession and he had no intent to control them. Great. He's off, wins that trial. If he doesn't, though, however, Lou's attorney and the district attorney work out a deal where he pleads to reduce charges and receives probation and no active time in prison. This is important. This is a plea deal. This is kind of the way it works here every day in Maricopa County. Now, if Lou violates the terms of his probation by using cocaine and has a positive drug test, the case for the district attorney just got easier. This is the big thing. You think you're in the clear, but you're really not. So now all the district attorney has to do is send Lou to prison and to jail, is to prove that they followed the proper procedure that was used to conduct the drug screening and a positive test for cocaine occurred. This is much easier than proving that Lou had the intent to control the cocaine in the original case. Here's a secret. A smart district attorney knows that she or he may get a second shot at you on probation and will have a much easier case to prove. Now, I know this is tip number one, and it kind of starts out a little complex here, and this is, really meant more for hopefully defense attorneys to see and think and consider, is when you accept a plea deal, you're typically going to get a reduced charge. So if you had sales, you might get, simple possession. If you have all kinds of different, possession of different drugs, you might plead it down to just one case. Well, in Arizona, we have different propositions, first of all, that say if it's a drug offense, if it's simple possession, you're not going to get jail, you're not going to get prison for it, unless you have subsequent violations. And that's what we're talking about here, subsequent violations that really hold your feet to the fire, per se. Even on first, second time offenses, you fall into the probation category. This can still happen. So I don't want to necessarily say you're totally out of the clear, but this is very, very important. If you take a plea to, say, a class 4 felony, and you're like, great, this was previously a class 2 felony for sales, now it's a class 4, I'm going to be on probation, it very well may look good for you, and it very well may be good for you. However, if there is an underlying drug problem that you as the defendant can't overcome, and we know for essentially a fact that you are going to be on probation, you're going to have a probation officer, you're going to be forced to be doing drug tests, and if you don't do the drug tests, you might as well not be on probation anyways. But if you do the tests and the tests come back positive, then great, you've now violated your probation, which means, very simple, probation officer submits a recommendation, they file it back with the court, it gets in front of a judge, you get to admit or deny, essentially have another trial over whether you violated your probation, lower standard, not all the rights that you were guaranteed with the original trial, and ultimately it's up to the judge to sentence you again, where they can say, look, you're going to go to prison for the presumptive, for an aggravated, for a minimum time. And this is important because a lot of people try and think that, oh great, well, if I mess up once, they'll put me back on probation. Sure, they might. The judge might, feel some pity towards you, some empathy if, you were struggling, or if, sure, it was your first time you messed up. Of course, that's not something you should just, bet your bottom dollar with, because that may not happen. I've seen it happen in other people's cases. It's just nothing that you want to gamble on here. Anyway, so that's why this is the first number is so important here. The first tip is if you are not somebody who you think can succeed on probation, then sometimes you're better off not entering into it. Of course, you'll have to contact my firm, contact me for a free consultation. I'll more than happily walk you through kind of some of the positives, negatives of this, and just to give you a hint, sometimes it's better than to do more jail and less probation, or even no probation in some of these cases. Anyways, moving on. Tip number 2 is to keep your appointments with your probation officer and to cultivate a good relationship with him or her. This sounds easy, it sounds simple. The problem is probation officers are people too. They're social workers in a sense. They get overworked, underpaid, and it causes problems that they may have in their own personal lives that they bring to work. You as the defendant, it's not your job to make their life any easier. Of course, if you make it harder though, it's only going to look bad for you, make things worse for you. So the goal here is essentially to make life easier for the probation officer. So no excuses. Keep your appointments if you don't want your probation officer to come to your home or place of work to look for you. Great, because they can, they will. It happens very frequently. Most times they show up with a police officer too. Not what you want. So first, missing appointments is typically a violation of your probation, number 1. In addition, your probation officer comes looking for you. There's a better chance he or she may find additional violations, very common. For example, petitioner Joe's at work and cannot get a ride to the probation office. Joe fails to call his probation officer because he just doesn't want to go through the hassle. Joe goes home. Bob comes over to chat with Joe. Bob lights up a joint at Joe's home. You know how this ends. So on and so forth. Joe's probation officer chooses this time to visit Joe's home because he missed an office visit. So do your best to make a good first impression on your probation officer. He or she may have a lot of power. They do. They have so much power over you. It is unreal. Your probation officer may be willing to overlook some minor violations if he or she believes you are sincerely trying to follow the rules and turn your life around. Finally, make sure your probation officer always has your current contact information. If you move, be sure to let him or her know. Now, this is what's very important these days is, most of our probation officers are tech savvy. We all have cell phones. We can text, we can call, we can do voicemail. It doesn't have to be emails. It doesn't have to be, going in person every single, day of the week in today's day and age. Now, what I've experienced with some people is, some of my clients even, is they will use the excuse, well, I called and I left a message and I never heard back. And then I called again, left a message and never heard back. I called and left a message and never heard back. Week in, week out, week in, week out. And it sounds good when you tell it to me. The problem is you technically never actually talked to your probation officer. Sure, you did what you think was right, but how do you prove that? How do you prove you left voicemails? You can't. You honestly can't. So that's why it's typically better to get something in writing. Something in writing like a text message that shows that you actually sent the text message to your probation officer. That probation officer has responded to you in the past using that same phone number. Same story with this person is they left the voicemails and it actually wasn't on their phone. It was the wrong phone number, so they thought they were doing it right. Thankfully, I got involved days before a warrant got issued because they thought that they had ghosted them. So It's important that you don't just do what you think is right. You have to get in contact with your probation officer. Starting off on the right foot is always great. It's even better to be over in contact. And this is what I advise most of my clients is, look, in a very productive way, you should almost be annoying your probation officer. Hey, I'm heading to work today. Hey, everything's good today. Just wanted to check in and let you know. Hey, I'm off to my drug test. Hey, I'm off to my counseling class. And your probation officer is going to get so sick and tired of you texting them updates and calling them with every updates. They're going to finally go, hey, thank you very much. By the way, you don't need to tell me this every single day. Just once a week, write it down. Give me a summary. Tell me what's going on. Let me know if there's problems. And that's the position you want to be in if you're on probation. It's the classic story of, especially with your probation fines. They always say, well, you have $1,000 to pay. We're going to put you on monthly payment plans of $100. They always tell you can pay more than $100, but you can never pay less. And that's kind of the same theory here. So you can always let your probation officer know more. Just you can't let them know less. You can't hide out from them. And if you do, they can very easily issue you a warrant. It's very simple. They submit it to the judge. It gets granted overnight. And then there's a police officer waiting at your house in the morning. Okay. Number 3, keep all your paperwork that has to do with your probation. I know this should hopefully be key, but this is where the problem lies is everybody thinks, great, I kept all my court paperwork, everything that happened at court, my plea agreements, my sentencing paperwork, and, I thought that was all the important stuff. Well, all of your probation paperwork is just as important. It has a lot of the information that you need, things that you have to comply with, things that you should be reading through. And if something's on your paperwork that doesn't look right, you need to get that fixed as soon as possible. This is the whole part of, ignorance isn't bliss. You need to actually know what's going on. So, either way, keep yourself an expandable file folder, toss every piece of paper in it, certificates, receipts of anything you have that has to do with your probation. If you want, have proof that you paid your fines, restitution, attended all your programs, classes, meetings with your probation officer that your probation requires. This is very important, especially today's day and age. Honestly, what I recommend is you grab your cell phone. Hopefully it's a cell phone that you use every day, that it's not a friend's, but you take a photo of it. Literally take good photos of every single thing you have, certificates of completion, your receipts, because believe it or not, you're more than likely going to be able to find a picture, whereas if you move, your car gets broken into, you lose your documents, it's really hard to get that proof back. And hopefully a digital copy stays somewhere that you can find it, and you won't lose it as easily. Something that's important too is taking photos and documenting things that your probation officer says that you're not doing. I know that can be sometimes sounds counterintuitive, but if somebody says that you're not, going to work, take a selfie at work of you clocking it. Don't take a photo without you in the photo, because that just looks like somebody at your job took the photo. You got to be in the photo, take it, save it. Because they're going to put a date stamp on your phone, and then you can come to court and say, look, I was at work this day. Here's a photograph. I know it sounds tedious. I know these tips have helped so many people before, which is why I want to share them with you. Anyways, next one. Keep good records of your job searches and expenses, especially if money is an issue. This is huge. As part of probation, you essentially are proving that you, or need to prove that you can be a productive member of society. You can reintegrate into society without essentially a probation officer helping you, forcing you, holding your hand through the whole way. Of course, part of a probation officer's, role, this is part of the social work side of it, is they're supposed to be supportive of you. They're supposed to be able to help you out, give you resources. I will tell you what, they are not there to do it for you. I know a lot of people, try and blame their probation officer for things not going right. It's a weak excuse. Judges don't buy into it. Your probation officer doesn't have to do everything for you. They don't have to hold your hand. You're really meant to be an adult and supposed to do these things on your own, and you got to do it. Anyways, money is an issue for most probationers. The typical because the court typically imposes fines, fees, restitution on people who receive probation. It's when you have to pay it off as well. You need to get a job with a criminal record. That may be easier said than done. Without a job, you cannot pay the money ordered by the court. Even if you find a job, you may not have enough money to pay court-ordered fines, fees, and living expenses. The inability to pay court-ordered costs, fees, and restitution can be a defense to a probation violation. Typically, a court must find that a probation violation was unwillful before probation is revoked. Therefore, the court may continue your probation if you can prove you made good faith efforts to pay. Look for a job. Keep a detailed record of when, where you searched. For example, on this day, I went to A, B, and C. So on and so forth. This is who I met with. This is the outcome of it. Your probation officer may provide you with some forms. They typically do that indicate where you look for a job. Don't overlook this. Don't try and cheat it. Honesty is going to get you probably further than faking it till you make it in this kind of a situation. If your probation officer does cite you for failure to pay a fine, this form could be a critical piece of evidence at your probation hearing. Sure, you went to the place to go for hiring, but judges like to see something tangible. This is just, it's so true, and that's why I can't stress this enough. And this is what everybody says, lawyers or not. They say it's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove. And you go into court and say, look, I swear I went and found, I went and did 3 interviews. But if you don't actually write it down, even if it's you that writes it down, the judges typically aren't going to believe you. Simple fact of the matter is judges have been lied to before, and they don't like to give everybody, sometimes the benefit of the doubt, as you would hope. Anyways, your attorney approach a judge, show you the list, show the good faith effort there. Similarly, keep a record of your expenses, rent, power bills, medical expenses, food, other necessities. This is a defense for failure to pay. Very true. I know it's not easy, living, paying your normal expenses, cell phone bills, water, food, entertainment. You are allowed to have some fun on probation. That's part of assimilating into normal day-to-day life and culture and society. However, if you are not paying your fines and fees, they're going to look at that and they're going to want to know why. And if you don't have any detailed records showing like what your expenses are, and you can show you have a job, then it looks like you just don't care. And that's not, of course, the truth of the matter. It just is something that is going to hurt you, and it shouldn't. So, especially if it's restitution. Restitution is something you have to pay somebody else, typically involved in a theft case. So that's a big deal. Typically, probation officers are reasonable enough to say, look, I'm going to overlook the fact that your fines aren't paid, but you need to start paying them next week, next month, so on and so forth. What is important too is typically when you begin probation, the judges in Maricopa County typically set off, just as if you start probation, whether it's right after your case ends or whether it's right after you get out of prison, they typically will set your first payments to begin about 3 months after you get out into society, in order to ensure that you have some adequate time to get some money together, and that way you can land on your feet per se, and without the big financial struggle. Something that's important too, and this isn't always appropriate for this video, it's in some of my other ones, a good defense attorney would be able to negotiate down probation fees. Probation fees change frequently. Right now I believe it's $65 a month, so you have to pay to be on probation. I know it's a bummer, but it's the law, it's the way it is. But judges do have the discretion to reduce that amount or even completely remove it. There are some guidelines, but either way, a good attorney will try and do that for you. Another tip is, especially with paying off the court fines, is typically, and I want to say typically because it's not every single case, but typically in drug cases and other cases where you have to pay mandatory fines and fees for your conviction under a guilty plea or being found guilty at trial, is if you are on probation, you're essentially required to pay off all your fines and fees while you are on probation. So for instance, you're on probation for 3 years. If that 3 years finishes and you still have fines that you owe, essentially what's going to happen is they're going to get a criminal restitution order against the state of Arizona. Basically what that means is they're going to force you to pay it, then they're going to send it to a collections agency, and then they're going to compound interest on it, and then they're going to keep raising the price over and over and over and over. It's ugly. It's not what you want or should see or do. So it's a big strategy tip to pay it off as soon as you can. While I'm giving these other tips, I know that this always comes up in tandem with it, is here in Maricopa County, typically, there's no law, but typically if you're doing well on probation, you can get off probation with the judge's approval at whatever the halfway mark is. So for instance, you get probation for 2 years. Once you hit the 1 year mark, as long as your probation officer approves it and a judge approves it, you can finish your probation. However, keep in mind, if you finish your probation before your fines and fees are paid, it will put you in the same boat where you're going to be paying more due to basically the collections agency. So it's part of being smart about it. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you in that scenario. I would much rather you be off of probation and pay the fines and fees a different way because of the potential to get put back in prison with having probation last any longer than it needs to. Anyways, continuing on. Consider participating in an alcohol drug program even if not required to by the terms of your probation. This is huge, huge. And I know nobody wants to do it, nobody likes it, but it is one of the biggest things that if there is any potential problem for you that this in any way will make your case look better, will make you look better, even if there is no future case, this is just something that you have to do. Online courses, in-person courses, whatever it is. Anyways, drugs and alcohol abuse is often a sensitive area for people on probation. Many who are caught up in the criminal justice system have substance abuse issues and have not admitted to the problem. Frequently, drug screens are a requirement of probation. A court may require you to participate in drug or alcohol rehab program, although it requires you to prove that you are alcohol drug free with periodic screenings. Okay, what this basically means is it's kind of like what used to be called TASK in Arizona. We have all kinds of different programs that are coming up and switching right now. But essentially what this is saying is on probation, a probation officer has a right to basically drug test you at any time. That's a screening. If you miss that drug test or your test comes out too watered down, then that's going to be taken as a positive. It sucks, I know. By saying, look, I missed it because I was at work and I couldn't show up, they're going to say, oh, great, well, it's a positive. A no test is a positive, just like a positive is a positive. You basically have to be there. You have to test. The test has to come out negative in order for you to be in good shape. Continuing on, regardless of whether the court requires participation in a drug alcohol support program, such as AA, NA, or some serious consideration to such a program for 2 reasons. If you're cited for a probation violation, your good faith participation in a drug alcohol program may improve your standing with the court, with the judge, absolutely. And more importantly, if you do have a drug or alcohol problem, the program may help you overcome it and change your life dramatically for the better. And this is just something that, once again, I can't stress enough. I know it's, typically something a lot of people don't want to do. It's hard to voluntarily check yourself into any kind of rehab, any kind of outpatient treatment. It's just crucially important for you to do it, to get into it if you think in any way that this will be any kind of problem. Quick story about myself is I voluntarily went into not a program, but I went into voluntarily testing where I would get random calls and say I would have to go test. I did this as part of proving because of my DUI I had in my past to show that I wasn't an alcoholic after going to law school while getting my bar license. And it was what I would point to as single-handedly the most important thing that allowed me to get my license without any kind of restrictions, any problems, because I went and voluntarily submitted myself to say, look, I'm willing to let you test me on any random day you want for 3 months, or however long it was going to be. It ended up being 3 months for me. And I had all the proof. And sure, I had to pay out of pocket. Hopefully you have insurance that helps you, cover some of the costs. I know it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it adds up. I know when you voluntarily do things like that as well, you can get certain extra benefits such as retesting samples if you think for whatever reason it came out positive, and so on and so forth that you should do. But continuing on, we have tip number 6, follow no contact orders. This is something that I always like talking about. I know it's always a sore subject, and it's kind of, your attorney we're here to advise you and give you the best advice possible. And I know we don't live in your life. We don't, walk in your shoes. We don't know what's going on, behind closed doors. But this is something that's important. No contact orders, frequent probation restrictions that occur, and the violation occurs, and it's a big problem. Anyways, if the crime has anything to do with domestic violence, domestic assault, with spouses, significant others, co-workers, colleagues, neighbors, this is where this arises. If the order says to stay away from your spouse, your child, your fiance, anybody says to stay away from you have to stay away from them. You may feel remorse. You may want to make amends, repair the relationship. To make matters more complicated, your partner may be open to your advances and may agree to meet with you, resume your relationship. All too often, the result of a violation is the problems that created the original charge reemerge and a second conflict occurs. Or perhaps no conflict occurs, but your partner just wants you gone. The police are called and face two new charges: probation violation and new assault charges. The lesson's clear. Until the no contact order is lifted or expires, you have to obey it. Once again, I can't stress this enough. This is important on every level. Because it is almost in any way granted in every single case. You're not allowed to make, initiating contact with, the police officer who arrested you. You're not allowed in any trespass to go back to certain properties at all. And if you do, it is just the easiest way to get thrown back in jail and get new charges. What's important here is the part that I mentioned here in the middle that says the partner, the other person will typically reach out to you first, whether it's a phone call, text message, email, and they're going to say, hey, I'm sorry, this was all a mistake, I messed up, you're really a good person, and I wish this was all gone and over with. And that's great and all. Just know that they don't get in trouble. You're the one who gets in trouble. You're the one who's going to face consequences. If somebody approaches you like this, you give them immediately your probation officer's phone number and you say, let my probation officer know. That is the only thing you should be doing. That you don't follow up with them. You don't say, did you let the probation officer know yet? You don't do that in any way, shape, or form. You just say, I can't talk to you. Here's my probation officer's number. Let them know. That's basically the only way to deal with it, other than hiring a lawyer, which, to be honest, we're probably too expensive to make something like that happen. Your probation officer essentially has the discretion in almost every case to amend your probation requirements so that you don't get violated, to say you're allowed to have contacts with someone. Of course, this is part of what's in another video, but some of those things are, for instance, especially if it's with a spouse, a significant other, and there are children involved, they will make exceptions. The court will make exceptions. Judges will make exceptions. Probation officers will make an exception to allow you to have contact, especially these days where technology is at our fingertips. This means that you can still interact with your kids, with your other partner, in order to be a part of someone's life. It's just going to be limited. Whether it's, weekly phone calls, video meetings, it's something nobody wants per se, but it's better than nothing, and it's definitely better than, doing the right thing and then ending up in trouble. And that's typically so many of my clients that I represent. They go back to, their houses that they're not allowed to be at, and they say, look, I was married to this person for so many years and I can't just forget about that, and I know this order says I can't be there for a whole year, but it just breaks my heart more than, and I'd rather get in trouble than, be a whole year apart. And that's something that if you know that ahead of time, I'm not here to stop you, but I'll tell you what, the police will come and arrest you, and I'll be there to help you get out of it and help you, explain what's going on to a judge, to a prosecutor. But hopefully you can avoid that situation. There are better ways to do it. And like I said, typically contacting the probation officer well before that happens, and you let your probation officer know, and you take screenshots and you say, hey, this person keeps calling me and I'm not allowed to answer, but look, so you see screenshot, they're doing it because that one time that somebody calls you and you answer and that probation officer finds out, you're gonna look like you're guilty. And once again, it's not what you can say, it's what you can prove. And if you can actually prove that this person had been contacting you so many times before, then that's going to help your situation out a lot better. Anyways, number 7 tip. Choose your friends carefully. This goes without saying, but I know it's another one of the struggles that it's hard to change and overcome. If you're on supervised probation, major lifestyle changes may be required. For example, prior to probation, you could choose with whom you're associated with. However, probation conditions may forbid you from associating with people who have felony convictions. This is absolutely true. Technically, if you are on probation, you're not allowed to associate with other known felons. It's a ridiculous standard. I know it's hard, it's difficult, especially if these people happen to be your family, your very close friends. It's just the way it's explained to those friends and family is, look, this is temporary. I have to, we have to have our distance for some time until everything's, done on my end. And then you say, I promise we'll be back in action and all this. And whether you do or don't at that point is what it is. Probation may put other restrictions on people who you may associate with. This is typically people such as co-defendants, people that you just really shouldn't be associating with, even if it's not a co-defendant, but they're in the police reports, neighbors, bad influences. Probation holds a lot of discretion when it comes to this, and it can be unfortunate. Either way, if a convicted felon is an immediate family member, someone at your job, the exception typically applies. Tell your attorney, your probation officer, get their guidance on it. And once again, this is what I was mentioning, of trying to play it safe. This is part of, talking to your probation officer and letting them know everything in advance. In addition to the requirements of probation, you need to exercise independent judgment too. Do not associate with people who engage in behavior that will put you at risk. For example, assume your friend Bob typically has a little marijuana on him but has no criminal record. However, this particular day you're riding with Bob and he's speeding, not much, doing 67 in a 55 zone, and he's stopped by an officer. Bob has smoked in the car. Police officer smells the marijuana. Police officer searches the car, finds a small bag of marijuana lying on the console right beside where you are sitting. If you're charged with possession, you may win the case, you may not, but you can't take the risk. Plus, you're going to have to fight your probation violation case as well. A couple quick little things with this too. I mean, this goes for so many people, especially here in Arizona, Maricopa County. We're in this wild, wild west state per se. It is a violation. I know I go into this in some of my other videos that you should watch about proximity, ownership, and how to not get a violation for your being in possession of firearms or really any weapon, because it's against your probation to have any weapons, to be in possession of any weapons, and this is the thing where spouses like to have them, kids, parents, other people in your house have them. You're technically in possession of it, in some gray area there, but which is why you should watch some of my other videos to explain that. But either way, the point is, don't take the risk. Don't, if that's your excuse is, oh, it wasn't mine, it was theirs, you probably already know that's not a winning excuse. Something judges, lawyers, prosecutors, police officers, we've all heard it before. And sure, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. The point is just try not to ever put yourself in that situation, or else it's going to be very difficult to help you out. And that's ultimately the goal here, is to try and help you out and get things going the right way for you. Anyways, number 8, exercise caution when driving. Avoid traffic stops that could escalate into something more. I mean, this is a no-brainer. Nobody tries to get pulled over or anything like that. This is more of, the due care of making sure you don't leave the state when you're not supposed to, as you're not supposed to on probation without your probation officer's permission. But drive carefully, obey all traffic laws, make sure your vehicle has no equipment violations, keep your headlights on, your license plate, your blinker, your window tint, all those things that you're supposed to be doing the right way. Keep your license, registration, insurance current on your person, on your vehicle, pay outstanding traffic tickets. This is important. And so many people come into contact with police officers because of traffic violations, whether they're so minor or not. And this plays into what I was mentioning earlier of probation officers. If you don't stay in contact with them, they might issue a warrant and you have no idea about it. And then you get pulled over for, a simple, expired tags, and then there's a warrant out for you. You're not going home right then that day. You're going to get arrested, and you're going to get taken and booked into jail. You're going to, get your car towed, and then guess what? You're going to tell the officer, no, officer, there's no way I have a warrant. I promise you I don't. That must be a mistake. And that officer is going to be smart, and they're going to go, well, are you on probation? And you go, well, yeah, but everything's going fine. He said, well, apparently not. And he's going to, put the handcuffs on you, throw you in the back of the car, and he's going to have a nice, smug smirk on his face the entire drive to the police station while you're sitting there, kicking the back of the seat, saying, I swear to God, this wasn't me. And there must be a problem. But all the more reason, just try not to get pulled over in the first place. I know that's easier said than done for many people in many situations. Don't drive without a license. Follow the damn laws the way you're supposed to when you drive. solve so many problems. I mean, these days too, you don't have to be a driver. You can get Ubers, Lyfts, ride shares to get places, public transport. You can even get everything delivered to you in most cases. Anyways, don't loan your car to anybody or anyone else or anyone who poses a risk of getting stopped. Similarly, don't ride with anyone unless you're confident the person is not involved in any illegal activity that could get you in trouble. This is a no-brainer. This goes into who you associate with. These are the kind of things, especially, probation sometimes comes in with DUIs. DUIs, you got to put interlock devices on your vehicle. And a lot of people just try and ignore that and say, oh, well, I let, Jimmy borrow my car. Well, Jimmy doesn't have to follow an interlock device. You do. It's your responsibility, and if they go and remove it, they get in a car crash, they do something wrong, and you could be potentially at fault, face more criminal violations and the violation of your probation. Anyways, number 9 is know and follow any gun possession restrictions. I know I briefly touched on this earlier, and I'm glad I made a whole point in here because you may not be allowed to possess a gun due to prohibited possession or felony conviction restrictions. This restriction may extend beyond actual ownership of a gun. It may have the guns in your hands, and it does. I know I go into a whole other video about this. Probation can include a gun that is in your home, or that you have access to. So, the prohibition extends that far. And this is the part that is very stressful for many people, is to try and tell somebody this, especially who owns a gun, who, you're probably staying at their house, try and get that person to lock that gun away somewhere else, somewhere where you don't have access to it. In a gun safe is ideally preferred. That you don't have a key to, you don't have a key to their bedroom, you don't have keys to their car, and it's somewhere out of your possession, just in case. I've seen it happen before, and it's a tough one. Even if the gun is owned by someone else in your household, you could possibly be charged with violating probation. Absolutely true. Quick other thing about this too, it's not always necessarily just guns, it's weapons. Anything in Arizona that is a weapon is, and this is another video that I go into, but I want to briefly touch on it because it's so important. I've had to help so many people on this kind of a problem, and it frustrates me probably more than it frustrates you guys. But a weapon, you're not allowed to be in possession of weapons. Not just guns, not just firearms. A weapon is basically anything that was designed for deadly use. And I don't want to go too deep into this, but this goes for certain kinds of knives, certain kinds of, other things that you wouldn't typically call a weapon. You want to say your bow and arrows, the things that serve, your steak knives, the things that serve other purposes. I've seen it happen frequently. The police will charge you with it and say you're a prohibited possessor. You can't be, in possession of a samurai sword because it was designed for deadly use. I know it's a struggle. I know that's something you're probably never thinking of. Many people aren't. Everyone's just thinking about the firearms, the guns, shotguns, handguns, rifles, but there's more to it. So be smart. Really stay away from anything that may potentially get you in trouble. Contact me for a free consultation. I'll be more than happy to tell you where you can play it safe, where you can't, where you're towing the line. This is part of what I say here. Raise this issue immediately with me, your attorney, your probation officer. Wait until the probation officer finds don't wait until they find it in your home during a home inspection, because then there'll be problems. All of our rules, laws vary. They change. Even here in Maricopa County, things change frequently. It's a very case-by-case situation. It's not in every situation this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. There's a lot of gray area in this. Not much case law, not much guidance on this. Anyways, finally, this is the last one. This doesn't affect too many people, even though it actually does. If you're required to register as a sex offender, be sure to register. People convicted of sexual offenses typically have to register their address. There's a database. Yes, registering is embarrassing. Makes it difficult to rent houses, apartments, makes it hard to find a job. You may not really think you pose a risk to the community. However, all the above excuses are irrelevant. One of the last things the judge or district attorney and the prosecutor wants to hear is an excuse of letting a sexual offender off the hook, who then harms another person. So this honestly goes for anybody, not just being a sex offender, but just being a convicted felon. No judge, no prosecutor ever wants to go home at the end of the day and go, man, I saw myself on the news today because that was somebody that, I sentenced, and I should have just put them in jail. Instead, I gave them a chance on probation, and guess what? They didn't follow the rules I gave them on probation. They didn't go and register. They didn't stay away from that person they were supposed to stay away from, and they kept weapons, and then there's a problem, and then they're in trouble, and then somebody else is hurt. And it's terrible for that judge, because now they're going to probably unfairly go and put harsher restrictions on every single person the day after that. And so that's where this is so important for you, for hopefully everyone else, for a family member, a loved one. This is why you don't just try and squeak by. You try and get it all done the right way, and then be done with it. Make better life choices and decisions, so that way you hopefully never end back up on probation. My last page here is just a recap that essentially goes through the things that I've discussed above. What I want to say, though, is we've handled just so many of these cases on a daily basis. I get phone calls about probation violations. I know I do free consultations for them. I know many people hire me, like I said, at all kinds of different stages of probation, whether you're in a probation violation already, or you think your probation officer is about to violate you. The sooner the better, because I'm going to tell you all the same things I basically did in this, and then of course some more things that are specific to your situation. But once again, it's really about what we can prove. We're going to show that you are actually the good person, that you aren't intentionally breaking the law, even though you might have some other things that come up that are violations. There's some goals and things that we do with probation officers that I'm sure not many other attorneys do, that works out in the end for you, for everyone else, and ultimately to hopefully better the system and to make it a lot more smooth. So if you or loved one anyway has some questions, needs some help with probation violations, please contact me, contact my firm, and I'll be more than happy to help you.